agus ní mór do marrá tá sé har a bheith deachar bheith faideach le level na díspóireachta seo ón rialtas agus ó ina fáil ag caint a scáthí bheith tá sé har a bheith deachar. Tá géir céim tithiíochta i ngéist agus tá sé artham aitheanta a thabhairt den géir céim sin agus céimena faoi le a thógáil chun doling leis an géir céim. Alas, Ken Corley, it's difficult to remain patient, actually, with what's happening on behalf the reply from the government and indeed the approach from Fianna Fáil in relation to this matter. I have no hesitation in supporting the principle of this bill, and I fully understand where the TD is coming from it, as with all the other initiatives that we've brought in over the last 2.5 years. And I listened to a minister, and in a sense I'm glad he has left the Dáil, although I realise he's busy, because my patience has worn thin listening to him talking about not trampling on people's rights. Now, the minister that's in the chamber might acknowledge that we are trampling on people's rights. There are 10,000 plus homeless, including almost 4,000 children. I would call that trampling on their rights. We then have a major number of people on the waiting list increasing by the day. He talks about unintended consequences. At what stage does a sensible government and a rational government realise that 10,000 people homeless is not acceptable collateral damage for your market-driven policies? At what stage do you realise if you keep and acknowledge pouring money into the private market, you are actually part of the problem, not the solution? We have now 27 people dead directly on our streets as a result of homelessness. As I said, we have huge waiting lists. In Galway City, we go back to 2002. That's who we're housing off our waiting list. The minister talks about ideology and the far left. I have repeatedly said I'm a very practical, pragmatic female politician. And there is a solution to this problem. But first, let me say that it is not the ideological left that has ideology, it is the government, driven by the ideology that the market will provide, in flagrant disregard of the evidence that the market is not providing, but is part of the problem. Father Peter McFerry, repeatedly, without any agenda, has drawn to your attention the extent of the housing crisis. I read from a letter here in September, 51 academics, and we often accuse them of living in ivory towers, but they came out of their ivory towers, including 6 professors and 42 doctors, and 3 other people, including an architect, a research officer with SIP2 and so on, to tell us, Minister, if you could, not the hard ideological left, telling us, look, there's a major housing crisis. We can't pursue the market-driven agenda. We need to step in as a government, Ilor Aneni, to be right in the middle of providing houses, to enshrine a right to a home in our constitution. What you have done, and previous governments, including, I'm afraid, Labour, was to privatise and marketise houses, not look on them as a home. And the first step in doing that was driven by Labour and Fine Gael in relation to HAP. And they said it was the only game in town, and unfortunately it is, but there are no homes in Galway available under the HAP. And your department is setting weekly and annual targets for the local authority to move people from the rent supplement to HAP houses, and there are no HAP. And on my desk before me I have a letter from somebody whose rent supplement has been stopped and they cannot get a HAP landlord. And they are in a house, but the landlord doesn't want to go under the HAP scheme, and they are in receipt of no payment. That's what your policies are doing. Rather than declaring an emergency, as was mentioned already, it was declared in the FEMPI legislation, the guarantee for the banks. Incidentally, Minister, the banks that are not loaning developers any money now, the banks that we bailed out, and this government had to set up another quango and another level of bureaucracy lately to loan money. This legislation certainly may have practical difficulties, but they can all be sorted out with appropriate amendments. What it is doing is asking the government to recognise an emergency so that therefore the appropriate steps can be taken to restore the balance. Yes, of course, we need landlords. Quite clearly we do, but the biggest landlord should be the state. And we praise and we follow the European Union in lots of things, and we want to be the best boy and girl in the class, but we won't follow them on social housing. We won't look to Austria or the other good examples that have a very high rate of public housing. And that's what we need to do here, send out a message to the market that the government will provide homes for our people, pending the construction of those houses, which should be done on a multi-pronged level, from small builders to cooperative housing to all sorts of things that you're not doing. Pending that, there has to be a freeze on rents and so on with the proposals in this bill that can be suitably amended. Finally, I'm going to use the last few seconds to say Galway City has, I would say, the biggest housing crisis in the country, the biggest homeless problem. We do have land, but we need more land. The land that we do have in public ownership in Kent Station, the dock and elsewhere is not subject to a master plan. I have repeatedly pointed out that it is developer-led all over again. And so this is a city that should have no housing crisis, and yet it is the worst in the country.